When Arden Bellamy came home before noon, he did not find his 4-year-old daughter resting from a stomach bug, recovering from preschool anxiety, or sleeping under a blanket as everyone had allowed him to believe. He found Marlowe in a silent room, standing on one foot on a narrow wooden step stool, holding a heavy book over her head while a metronome counted every second of her suffering. How had a child living behind a private gate in one of the most comfortable streets of Charlotte become afraid of food, rest, school, and even the arms of her own father? And why had every explanation in that house sounded like care until the door was finally left open? The story began in Charlotte, North Carolina, inside a pale stone house near Myers Park, where trimmed hedges, tall windows, and a curved driveway made the Bellamy family look untouched by ordinary trouble. Arden Bellamy had built a respected real estate development company from small apartment renovations into projects that shaped entire neighborhoods. He was used to boardrooms, zoning meetings, private lenders, and lawyers who waited for his signature before moving. In public, people described him as calm, sharp, and generous when it suited him. Inside his own home, where he should have been less powerful and more present, he had allowed grief and work to make him blind. His first wife, Liana, had died when Marlowe was still too young to understand why the soft voice at bedtime disappeared. After the funeral, Arden did what many people around him praised as strength. He filled his calendar, traveled between Charlotte and Atlanta, answered calls late into the night, and told himself that providing a secure future was a form of love. He hired staff, paid for the best pediatrician, enrolled Marlowe in a private pre-kindergarten program, and made sure the house never lacked anything money could buy. Then Blythe entered the household with a quiet confidence that seemed like order after sorrow. She was polished, careful with her words, and skilled at turning harsh rules into language that sounded responsible. She said Marlowe was sensitive, that the child's stomach did not handle normal food well, that preschool overstimulated her, that other children carried germs, and that strict routines would help her body grow stronger. Arden wanted to believe that someone was watching the details he kept missing. Because Blythe never sounded cruel, he mistook control for competence. The changes began so gradually that each one looked explainable by itself. Marlowe stopped running across the hallway with dolls under both arms. She began asking fewer questions at dinner. Her preschool teacher left messages about repeated absences, but Blythe answered them before Arden could. When the little girl stood at the kitchen island with her shoulders tucked inward, told him that structure was helping her learn self-control. When Marlowe pushed away toast, Blythe said, the new meal plan was part of a pediatric wellness approach. Arden noticed the child's small wrists, her dry lips, and the way her eyes searched the room before she spoke. Yet he kept waiting for a clearer sign. One morning, Arden found Marlowe at the breakfast table, in pale pajamas that seemed too loose around her. She held a glass of thick green juice with both hands, but she had not taken more than a few careful sips. Blythe stood beside her, hair pinned neatly, expression smooth, explaining that Marlowe had slept badly and should not be forced to attend pre-kindergarten. Arden had a meeting in Atlanta that could affect a large downtown project. His car was already waiting outside, and his cell phone kept lighting up beside his coffee. Marlowe did not cry or argue. That was what unsettled him. A frightened child might plead, but she only lowered her head, as if asking for help had already failed too many times. Before he left, she pushed a folded sheet of paper toward him. On it was a house drawn with dark windows, a black roof, and a tiny figure sitting alone in the center. The figure had eyes, hair, and a body, but no mouth. Arden stared at the drawing longer than he meant to. The image had none of the uneven joy children usually put on paper. No sun in the corner, no uneven flowers, no animal floating beside the house. It looked like a warning made by a hand too young to write one. Blythe explained that grief sometimes appeared in children's drawings, and that he should not encourage dramatic behavior by reacting too strongly. He folded the paper and placed it inside his jacket instead of leaving it on the table. His car had gone only a short distance toward the airport when a line of thunderstorms forced ground delays across the region. The meeting was postponed before he reached the terminal. For the first time in months, Arden felt relief at a canceled trip. He thought about buying Marlowe a small stuffed animal from a shop near home, returning before lunch, and spending the afternoon with her without assistance, calls, or excuses. Rain struck the windshield as the car turned back toward Myers Park. Arden kept touching the folded drawing inside his jacket. The more he thought about the figure without a mouth, the less he could accept Blythe's explanation. When he arrived, he asked the driver not to announce him. He wanted to see his daughter before anyone adjusted the scene around her. Inside, the house was too still. Not peaceful, not quiet in the way a large home rests between errands, but sealed. No cartoon music came from the family room. No small feet moved across the upstairs landing. No caretaker hummed in the kitchen. Arden climbed the stairs slowly, then stopped when he heard a dry sound from the far room. Tick, pause. Tick, pause. The rhythm was exact, mechanical, and wrong. He moved toward the half-open door. Beyond it, he heard a thin breath, strained and uneven, the breath of a child using more strength than she had. Through the narrow gap, Arden saw Marlowe balanced on a wooden step stool, one foot lifted, both arms raised toward the ceiling, a book shaking above her head, while Blythe sat nearby with a stopwatch in her hand. Arden did not open the door right away. The man who had argued with investors across conference tables and challenged city officials over permits stood frozen in his own hallway because his mind refused to arrange what his eyes were seeing. The family room had been cleared of toys and soft pillows. A single black dot had been drawn on the wall, placed at the height of Marlowe's face. The child stared at it without blinking, as if looking away would bring punishment. The metronome sat on a low table, measuring the room with a patience colder than anger. Every tick seemed to tighten the thin line of Marlowe's shoulders. Her arms trembled under the weight of an oversized coffee table book, the kind Arden had once bought for decoration and never opened. Sweat darkened her curls at the temples. Her pajama sleeves clung to her forearms. The little girl's face looked distant, not stubborn or dramatic, but emptied by effort. Blythe watched from a cream sofa with her legs crossed, and her back straight. She did not yell. She did not touch the child. That absence of visible violence made the room more disturbing, because everything had been arranged to leave no obvious mark. The stool was unstable, the book too heavy, the time too long, the silence too controlled. Blythe had built a punishment that could be described later as training. Marlowe's support knee bent. Only a little, the book dipped. Blythe placed her teacup on the side table with careful slowness, and that small motion made the child panic. Marlowe forced her legs straight again and lifted the book higher, though her hands shook so badly that the cover scraped against her knuckles. Arden understood then that his daughter was not trying to improve. She was trying not to fail. His first mistake came from love mixed with shock. He shoved the door open too hard. The panel struck the wall, and the sharp sound cut through the room. Marlowe, startled, lost the fragile control she had been fighting to keep, and slipped from the stool. The book fell beside her. Her small body hit the rug with a dull sound that seemed to stop Arden's breath, even as the metronome continued its cruel, steady count. He reached her in seconds and knelt on the floor, arms open. Marlowe did not crawl toward him. She dragged herself backward with weak, clumsy movements, eyes wide, face pinched with fear. Her reaction held no relief. She looked at her father as if he were part of the system that measured, judged, and corrected her. That single movement exposed more than any accusation could have. Arden stopped with his hands suspended in the air. Guilt arrived before he had words for it. Marlowe had learned that adults did not rescue her when she failed. She had learned that weakness brought consequence. Somewhere inside that house, love had been turned into a reward she had to earn. Blythe rose from the sofa without hurry. She looked more interrupted than ashamed. Her expression suggested that Arden had walked in before a necessary process was complete. The calmness in her face changed the shape of his anger. If she had panicked, he might have imagined she knew she had crossed a line. Instead, she seemed certain that the line had belonged to her all along. Quick steps sounded in the hallway. Odessa Grant, the longtime household manager, appeared at the door with her cardigan pulled tight around her. She had worked for the Bellamy family since Liana was alive, keeping the kitchen stocked, managing cleaners, and caring for Marlowe during the long hours when Arden was away. For months, she had stayed careful, not because she saw nothing, but because every warning she raised was softened, dismissed, or turned into a complaint about boundaries. This time, Odessa did not ask permission. She knelt beside Marlo and wrapped a blanket around her. The child let her do it. Then Marlo clung to the older woman's sleeve with the desperate grip of someone holding the only safe thing in the room. Arden saw that too. His daughter did not trust the richest person in the house. She trusted the woman who smelled faintly of laundry soap and soup. Odessa reached into the pocket of her cardigan and removed a small piece of bread wrapped in a napkin. She offered it low and discreetly, as if even kindness had to be hidden. Marlo took it with both hands and ate too quickly, then slowed herself as soon as she remembered who was watching. The movement was so practiced that Arden felt something inside him. Harden the bread became the first clear clue, not a theory, not a concern, not a difficult conversation between adults, but proof that his child had been hungry enough for secret food. Arden looked at the green juice, still on the breakfast table in his memory. At the strict meal explanations, at the preschool absences, at the drawing with no mouth, every piece moved into place. Blythe began to frame the fall as a misunderstanding, a specialized exercise, a difficult but necessary correction for a child who had become fragile after losing her mother. Arden did not answer her. He lifted Marlo slowly, careful not to make sudden movements, and felt how little she weighed. The shock of it traveled through his arms. She was not merely slim, she was alarmingly light. Odessa brought a coat and another blanket from the hall closet. Arden carried Marlo down the stairs, past the perfect entryway, past the flowers Blythe had arranged that morning, past the family portraits that made the house look whole. With every step, he moved farther from the version of his life that had protected his pride and endangered his daughter. Outside, the storm had turned the driveway dark and slick. Blythe followed only as far as the front hall, her voice controlled, insisting through indirect explanations that taking Marlo out in the rain would make everything worse. Arden ignored it. He placed his daughter in the back seat, climbed in beside her, and told the driver to go to the pediatric emergency department. The car doors closed on the house, and the decision became irreversible. Odessa buckled herself beside Marlo and kept one hand near the child's blanket without gripping her. Arden held a bottle of water, but did not force it toward his daughter. Every instinct told him to fix something immediately, yet Marlo flinched whenever an adult moved too fast. The ride to the hospital became a lesson in how little he understood the fear living inside her. At the pediatric emergency department, in Charlotte, nurses moved quickly but gently. Arden had to release Marlo when they took her through a set of double doors, and the emptiness in his arms felt like punishment. He remained in the hallway with his suit damp from rain, his shoes leaving faint marks on the polished floor. Odessa stood beside him, quiet but steady, holding the napkin that had wrapped the bread, as if it were evidence of a crime. The first doctor returned with findings that destroyed Blythe's story piece by piece. There was no rare stomach disorder explaining Marlo's condition. There was no hidden infection making food dangerous. The child showed signs of dehydration, nutritional deficiencies, and exhaustion from physical stress that did not belong in the life of someone 4 years old. The doctor spoke carefully, but the meaning was not soft. What had been presented as wellness had harmed her. Then a pediatric psychologist joined the conversation after sitting with Marlo for a short, gentle evaluation. The concern moved beyond weight and weakness. Marlo believed food had to be earned. She feared resting because rest meant failure. She had learned to connect approval with endurance, silence, and obedience. The specialist explained that recovery would require more than meals. The child's sense of safety had been damaged. Because the hospital staff suspected abuse and neglect, a report was made to the Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services, and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department was notified. Arden did not object. That was the second turning point, because involving outside authorities meant he could no longer protect the family image while claiming to protect his daughter, his company, his marriage, his home, and his own conduct as a parent could all be examined. Odessa finally gave him the hidden part of her story. She had tried to question the routines when Blythe first removed snacks from the pantry and replaced normal meals with measured portions and bitter drinks. Blythe had answered through household rules, written schedules, and reminders that Odessa was not the parent. When Odessa slipped Marlo food, Blythe limited her access to the child. When the preschool called, Blythe handled the message before Arden saw it. Odessa had begun saving small records on her cell phone: a photograph of the locked pantry cabinet, a short video of the metronome sound from the hallway, and notes about days when Marlo had been kept home. That confession changed the way Arden saw the older woman. Odessa had not been silent because she did not care. She had been trapped between fear of losing her job, fear that no one would believe her over the new wife of a powerful man, and fear that if she were removed from the house, Marlo would have no one left inside it. Her failure was real, but so was the protection she had tried to give in the only way she thought she could. The social worker arrived before evening and gave Arden a choice that cut through every excuse. Marlo could not safely return to a home where Blythe had access to her. If Arden wanted his daughter released to his care when the doctors allowed it, he needed to create a clear safety plan, cooperate with the investigation, and accept that his own neglect of warning signs would be part of the review. He could protect his comfort, or he could protect his child. He could not do both. Arden called his attorney from the hospital hallway and instructed him to begin emergency steps to remove Blythe from the home, secure the staff records, and prepare for a separation. He also called his office and canceled every meeting without explanation. For the first time in years, no project was allowed to outrank Marlo. Blythe did not wait quietly at the house. By nightfall, Arden received an alert from the home security system. A camera near his private office had detected movement. Blythe had entered the room where household records, staff schedules, and old camera storage were kept. She was not packing clothes. She was pulling files from a cabinet and placing them into a tote bag. Arden watched the image on his cell phone from the hospital corridor, understanding that the truth had begun moving faster than his ability to contain it. The security alert forced Arden to act before he felt ready. Instead of driving back and confronting Blythe, he followed the advice of his attorney and called the police non-emergency line while remaining at the hospital. That decision prevented the scene Blythe seemed prepared to create. It also meant the house became part of an investigation, rather than another private argument hidden behind expensive walls. A detective from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department met Arden the next morning with a child protective services worker from the county. Because Arden owned the home and gave access to the security system, investigators were able to preserve footage from hallways, the family room entrance, the kitchen, and the office. The video did not show every moment inside the controlled room, but it showed patterns. Marlo being guided away from meals, Odessa stopped at the pantry, Blythe carrying the metronome upstairs, and the child leaving the family room unsteady on more than one day. Blythe's plan to erase the household paper trail began to collapse. The files she removed from the office had already been scanned by the family office for insurance and staffing purposes. The home security company also kept limited cloud backups that could not be wiped from the wall panel. What she thought was control became a record of control. Still, Blythe had her own countermove. She contacted people around Arden before he could speak with them. She suggested through carefully worded messages that he had suffered an emotional break triggered by grief, that he had misunderstood therapeutic routines, and that Marlo's condition was the result of long-standing fragility. She reached out to the private pre-kindergarten director and asked that confidential concerns not be shared with anyone outside the family. She also tried to persuade a family office employee to delay sending household documents to Arden's attorney. The attempt backfired because it brought forward another witness. The pre-kindergarten teacher had kept records of Marlo's fearful mornings, sudden absences, and a drawing in which the child had placed herself behind a locked door. The school had not known what was happening at home, but the teacher had already considered requesting a welfare check when Marlo stopped attending consistently. With the hospital report now active, those records became part of a larger picture. Arden was forced to face his own role when the social worker reviewed the timeline. He had signed school forms he did not read. He had accepted Blythe's health explanations without attending the pediatric appointments himself. He had allowed his daughter's world to shrink while believing money, staff, and a beautiful home proved she was safe. No detective accused him of wanting harm, But intention did not erase absence. The investigation moved into the house room by room. In the kitchen, officers found labeled containers of restricted foods, notes about allowed portions, and a locked cabinet where ordinary snacks had been kept away from Marlowe. In the family room, the black dot remained on the wall above the cleared rug. The step stool and the metronome were photographed. In Blythe's desk, investigators found schedules written in calm, elegant handwriting, describing balance drills, silence periods, food rewards, and corrective standing exercises. Each discovery made the hospital hallway feel smaller for Arden. He had once thought danger would look like chaos, raised voices, obvious bruises, or strangers near a playground. He had not imagined it could look like clean labels, soft voices, and a woman who used the language of discipline to hide punishment. The doctors would not release Marlowe immediately. Her body needed careful feeding, and her fear of food made even simple meals difficult. When a nurse brought applesauce, Marlowe studied the cup as if waiting for permission from someone not in the room. Arden stepped back instead of urging her, because the psychologist had explained that pressure, even loving pressure, could feel like another test. Late that afternoon, the county worker told Arden that release to him was not automatic. The department had to be satisfied that Marlowe would not return to the environment that harmed her, and that Arden could follow a safety plan without using wealth to avoid accountability. If he could not prove that, a temporary kinship placement or another protective arrangement might be considered while the investigation continued. That warning became the lowest point of his life. Arden had carried his daughter out of the house, believing the danger was behind her. Now he understood that saving her body from Blythe did not instantly make him safe in the eyes of the people responsible for protecting children. He sat outside Marlowe's hospital room while she slept under a thin blanket, realizing that he could lose her not because he had acted too late once, but because he had acted too late for months. Arden walked into the hospital conference room the next morning, knowing that every person at the table had a reason to question him. The county worker had a folder. The detective had copied security footage. The hospital social worker had notes from Marlowe's first attempts to eat. Arden's attorney sat beside him. But the lawyer could not soften the truth that mattered most. A child had been harmed in a home Arden controlled. Blythe joined through a separate arrangement with her own attorney, not as a frightened wife, but as someone still trying to preserve the meaning of what she had done. She continued to describe her routines as structure, resilience building, and corrective care. She claimed Marlowe had been weak before the marriage, and that Arden, overwhelmed by grief, had wanted results without understanding the discipline required. Her words were smooth, but this time they did not float unchallenged inside a private house. The evidence appeared in pieces, and each piece changed what had to happen next. The doctor's report showed that Marlowe's condition matched prolonged restriction and stress, not a sudden illness. The school records showed a pattern of fear and absence. Odessa's notes showed that secret food had become necessary. The security footage showed Blythe controlling access to meals and moving objects connected to the exercises. The written schedules turned vague suspicion into method. One page affected Arden more than the rest. It listed rewards and corrections beside Marlowe's name. Ordinary childhood needs had been treated like privileges: fruit after compliance, rest after proper posture, comfort only after quiet behavior. The language was neat enough for a planner, but the meaning was brutal. Blythe had not merely lost patience with a grieving child. She had created a private system where love, food, and rest could be withheld to shape obedience. The investigators also uncovered the reason Blythe had targeted schools so strongly. Pre-kindergarten created witnesses. Teachers saw when Marlowe looked exhausted. Classmates offered snacks. School routines allowed other adults to ask questions. By keeping the child home under the claim of illness, Blythe had protected the system from outside eyes. The fear of school was not because school had harmed Marlowe. It was because going there could expose what was happening at home. Arden began taking responsibility in ways that cost him more than statements of regret. He moved out of the Myers Park house instead of trying to return there with new locks. He agreed that Blythe would have no contact with Marlowe. He signed releases allowing the hospital, school, and county department to share necessary information with the investigation. He placed his company under temporary leadership and canceled travel until the safety plan was reviewed. For a man who had measured control through ownership, stepping away from control became the first honest act of fatherhood he had made in a long time. Blythe faced consequences beyond the family. Prosecutors began reviewing possible child abuse and neglect charges, not based on rumor or anger, but on medical findings, witness statements, written routines, and preserved video. Arden filed for divorce through the proper court process. The county department continued its own review, separate from any criminal case, because protecting Marlo did not depend on waiting for a final verdict. Marlo, meanwhile, did not recover in a straight line. She accepted a bite of food 1 hour and refused the next. She allowed Odessa to sit near her, but stiffened when Arden entered too quickly. She watched adult faces for signs of disappointment. Sometimes, when a nurse praised her, she looked frightened instead of pleased, as if praise were only the beginning of another demand. The psychologist asked Marlo to draw again. At first, she drew the same kind of house, dark windows, and a tiny figure without a mouth. Then, after a long silence, she added a small object beside the figure, a black dot on the wall. She could not yet explain everything with words, but the drawing connected the breakfast warning, the family room, and the fear that had followed her into the hospital. Arden saw the paper and understood that the most important truth still had to be spoken, in a way the court and the county could rely on. Adults had records, videos, and reports. Marlo had terror stored in her body and pictures. Before any final decision about custody, safety, or charges could be made, someone had to help that small, silent figure find a mouth. The deciding event came during a child forensic interview, conducted by a trained specialist in a neutral room, with the process recorded so Marlo would not have to repeat herself to every adult in the case. No one forced her to perform. No one demanded perfect answers. She was given paper, crayons, small breaks, and enough time to point, draw, and speak in fragments when she could. What emerged completed the meaning of the scene Arden had found behind the door. Marlo explained, in the only way a child her age could, that the stool, the book, the dot, the metronome, the bitter drinks, the missing meals, and the withheld rest belonged to the same system. She had been told through repeated corrections that her body was weak, that hunger made her better, that stillness proved discipline, and that mistakes made love disappear. She had not feared pre-kindergarten because of other children. She had feared that teachers would see she had broken rules by being tired, hungry, or unable to hold herself together. The county department approved Marlo's release to Arden only under a strict safety plan. He could not return her to the Myers Park house while the investigation continued. Blythe was barred from contact through court orders and the ongoing case. Odessa was allowed to remain involved, not as a hidden rescuer inside a dangerous house, but as part of a supervised circle of support. Arden accepted parenting education, regular counseling appointments for Marlo, follow-up medical care, and home visits. None of it protected his pride. All of it protected his daughter. The criminal case did not end in a single dramatic hearing. Prosecutors reviewed the medical reports, the preserved footage, the household records, and statements from Odessa, the school, and hospital staff. Blythe's defense argued that she had believed the routines were beneficial, but belief did not erase the harm documented by doctors or the deliberate restriction shown in the records. The court process moved slowly, as it should when a child's safety and an adult's responsibility are both at stake. Blythe remained away from Marlo while the case continued, and the divorce moved through a separate family court path. Arden also faced a consequence no lawyer could remove. The county report recognized that he had acted decisively once he discovered the abuse, but it also recorded his failure to respond to warning signs earlier. That sentence followed him more heavily than any headline could have. He did not challenge it. He carried it because it was true. The house near Myers Park was eventually emptied of Marlo's things. Arden did not let staff pack her toys without thought. He walked through the playroom himself, choosing what could come with them and what needed to be left behind. The heavy book was gone into evidence. The metronome was gone too. The black dot on the family room wall remained until the room was photographed, and when Arden saw it one last time, he understood why Marlowe's drawing had no mouth. The house had trained silence as carefully as it trained posture. They moved into a smaller rented house in Matthews, southeast of Charlotte, with creaking floors, a plain kitchen, and a backyard that turned muddy after rain. It was not impressive. No gate separated it from the street. The neighbors waved from porches. The refrigerator held normal food where Marlowe could see it. No one measured her bites. No one turned rest into a reward. At first, she still asked without words before touching a cracker, still froze when Arden lifted his voice on a business call, still placed toys in straight lines as if disorder could bring punishment. Arden changed his life in ways that looked ordinary from the outside and enormous from inside the house. He learned to sit on the floor without directing the game. He learned to offer food and accept refusal without anger. He learned that asking a frightened child to trust him was less useful than becoming predictable enough for trust to grow. He missed meetings, he lost deals, he let other people call him distracted. None of that mattered when Marlowe finally fell asleep on the couch without bracing her shoulders. Odessa visited often, sometimes cooking soup, sometimes folding laundry, sometimes sitting quietly while Marlowe built uneven towers with wooden blocks. The older woman no longer had to hide bread in a pocket. That simple change carried more mercy than any apology could. One afternoon after heavy rain, Marlowe stepped into the backyard wearing old sneakers and paused at the edge of a puddle. Arden watched from the porch but did not warn her about mud. She pressed one foot into the soft ground, then the other. Water splashed up her legs. For a moment she looked back at him, waiting for correction. Arden only stayed where he was. Hands open, face calm, Marlowe turned back to the puddle and jumped. Not gracefully, not perfectly, not as part of a lesson. She jumped because she wanted to. Mud spotted her shirt, her curls bounced loose, and her breath came out in a small laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as it struck him. Arden did not move to clean her. He did not turn the moment into praise she had to earn. He simply watched his daughter exist in a messy backyard, under a sky clearing after rain. The road ahead remained long. Fear does not leave a child just because a door closes behind the person who caused it. But in that yard, Marlowe was no longer the silent figure inside a dark house. She had a mouth now and a voice, and a father finally learning that love was not a system of correction. It was the freedom to come inside covered in mud and still be held.